Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, June the 17th, 2024. Now, this video is going to start with an account of the main astrological events this week, as I see it, and having done that, I'm going to focus on one aspect of the week, and I think that really is the power of Neptune. There are, at the beginning of a week, a lot of aspects involving Neptune, and these aspects are all taking place on the Aries point, and I do want to consider that, or at least taking place square the Aries point, because Neptune is now really close to 0 degrees Aries. And I want to consider a few people who might be impacted by this. For example, Justin Trudeau and the Argentine President Javier Milei. I also want to have a quick look at some solar returns. I looked at solar returns yesterday, the day before, and I want to look at them just one more time. In fact, I want to look at Donald Trump's solar return. I know this is 3 times in a row, but I'm really interested in Donald Trump's solar return. And what I want to do is I want to compare Donald Trump's solar return for this year with Margaret Thatcher's solar return for 1978. And having done that, I'll be looking perhaps a couple more solar returns. I'm not sure. I'll see how much time I've got left. But having done that, I'm going to look at the I Ching, and I'm going to do an I Ching reading for this week. I'm going to ask what is this week going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video. Just a reminder, if you don't want your I Ching done for this week, then just don't watch the I Ching segment. And so that I Ching segment will have 4 sections. I'll have a general reading, a reading relating to money, then business and career, and finally relationships. So let's start off by looking at what's going on astrologically this week. So here are the starting positions for this week. So this is what's going on right at the beginning of the week. So here is Monday's starting positions. So this is Monday 17th at midnight. And so what we notice is that there is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus in the last degree of Gemini, right at the end of Gemini. And it's square Neptune. And that's important, but it's also important the fact that it's happening at 0 degrees Aries, or aspecting 0 degrees Aries. Neptune is at 2952 Pisces. In other words, it's about to go into Aries. Neptune doesn't actually get into Aries because it goes retrograde before it gets a chance to do that. So Neptune is really slowing down now. And there we have Sun and Venus so close to the 0 degrees Cancer point. That is the solstice point, square Neptune. And that might, in the short term, indicate a certain sense of uncertainty. Where are things going? And things might go wrong for some of us. But if we try to be too precise, Neptune is not about precision. We need to have some slack in the system. We have to realize that we haven't got everything right, but new factors have to be considered. So Monday is certainly a busy day. It's also a busy day because we get 2 sign changes. Venus and Mercury move into Cancer, on the same day. So, we've got this build-up in Gemini, 4 planets in Gemini, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Jupiter, and then all of a sudden, Gemini loses half its planets. 2 of those planets switch into Cancer. And that's a big switch from air to water. All of a sudden we can feel that things are getting more emotional. And it can, in some cases, be the kind of emotion that is a bit overwhelming. We suddenly feel feel a bit neurotic about it. Maybe if we don't feel a bit neurotic about it, society is feeling a bit neurotic about it. And with all this stuff going into Cancer, there can be a certain clinginess to it. Cancer is a clingy sign. Suddenly issues about stability and the family become important. And in general, I think we're going to have to be taking things more seriously. I mean, in a way, Cancer is a more serious sign than Gemini. And we can't perhaps get away with trivial pursuits anymore because Cancer, is more serious. And that's only the beginning. On Thursday, it's the summer solstice. And with the summer solstice, that is when the sun goes into Cancer. And that takes place at 9:51 p.m. London time. So if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, East Africa, perhaps, then the summer solstice is going to take place tomorrow. Sorry, not tomorrow, on Friday. So depending on where you are, the summer solstice is on Thursday or Friday. And again, this summer solstice is close to the square to Neptune, so we just get more Neptune. So I think it is a week where Neptune is really strongly configured. And I'll talk about this more in a moment, but we just can't take everything for granted. Things could be problematic, and we shouldn't trust first impressions, and we shouldn't trust surface appearances. And I suppose with Neptune being so strong in the sense of highly configured with other things going on, and we shouldn't forget that Neptune is conjunct Skeet, this fixed star connected with shipwrecks and disasters. We have to be careful with water damage. Anything to do with water could be a problem, and we shouldn't do anything too dangerous. Talking about Skeet, I was reading the fixed stars, Eberton Hoffman, in their book on fixed stars, and they go through all the fixed stars, and they have this wonderful paragraph on Skeet in terms of what happened on Skeet. I mean, you might find this amusing or not so amusing. They were talking about the sun on Skeet, actually on the 22nd of September 1968, and they say there was a total eclipse of the sun on the 22nd of September 1968, and the fixed star Skeet was in conjunction with Uranus and the sun. So in Reinhold Eberton's diary, he talked about the following events: serious storms in Switzerland, valleys flooded, a landslide near Zurich interrupted traffic on the Autobahn. In Turkey, heavy storms and hail put several villages underwater. In Italy, a church collapsed. The Upper Rhine River showed the highest watermark in flood disaster history. There was a railway accident in Jakarta in Indonesia. In Mexico and in Uruguay, there were serious street riots. There was a commotion and fighting outside the Church of St. Paul in Frankfurt. Paulskirche is apparently what it's called, because of the conferring of a peace prize. In Moscow, there was a power struggle. And, to cap it all, a dead baby was conveyed by mail to the British Queen as a protest against Britain sending weapons to Biafra. In the late 60s, there was a war. There was a civil war in Nigeria. It's a civil war in Nigeria regarding Biafra. It was a really big. It was major conflict. A lot of people were killed. It was really very unfortunate. It was actually the main kind of news, aside from the Vietnam War. Biafra was a really big deal. So that kind of gives you a sense of Skeet, and just a reminder that Neptune is on Skeet, and it's been on Skeet for a long time, but it is possible that the Earth, Mercury and Venus square Neptune are triggering. And I'm not really talking about any particular day, I think, but, maybe early this week, well, specifically Monday. But then, of course, on Thursday, again, we've got the solstice. And so the sun squares Neptune. So we perhaps get more Skeet. Just want to have a quick look at how close Neptune is to Skeet right now, just to give us an idea. So Neptune, yeah, it's really close. It's 9 minutes orb. So Skeet should not be forgotten. Finally, Friday the 21st, Mercury sextile Mars, a nice easy aspect. Mercury is the planet of communication, obviously. It'll be in Cancer by this stage. It's sextiling Mars, so Friday may be a time when we can perhaps be a little more relaxed. Yeah, there'll be a little bit of aggression maybe, but it's fortunate aggression. It's a sextile. We can say what's on our mind, and we can communicate our thoughts, and if we need to be assertive, we can be assertive. Then over the weekend there is a full moon. Now I'm going to talk about that full moon later, so I don't really want to say much about the full moon. I think it does have implications. Now, one person who is going to be impacted by this full moon, the full moon is on June the 22nd, which is Saturday. I think that full moon, by the way, could hit Prince William. I'm not going to be talking about Prince William in this video. I'm going to talk about Prince William in a few days' time, but I think that Prince William could be under a bit of pressure this week. But I'm not going to talk about him right now. I'm going to talk about, who am I going to talk about? I want to start off by talking about the president of Argentina. He is Javier Milei. I'm sure I've mispronounced that. So Javier Milei, he became Argentinian president in December, I think. And so he is, if you like, a radical conservative. He wants to cut government expenditure. He's certainly got inflation down, but at a cost. His moves in the short term are bringing down living standards, and clearly many groups in Argentina are upset about it. The unions, the opposition. I think there have been riots in Buenos Aires. So what is going on for Javier Milei, and how is he impacted by this build-up at 0 degrees Aries? Now, he has a Mars-Pluto conjunction in his chart. Now, that Mars-Pluto conjunction, you can see that the midpoint of that Mars-Pluto conjunction is pretty much exactly 0 degrees Aries. So he has got Neptune on his Mars-Pluto conjunction. And at the same time, as Mercury and Venus and the Sun move into Cancer, they will be on his Mars-Pluto midpoint. So having Neptune on your Mars-Pluto midpoint and Sun, Venus and Mercury hitting at, triggering that, I would have thought Javier Milei has to be careful. I think he knows he has to be careful, and he's certainly mindful to assert huge amounts of power, I would have thought. But with Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, are you going to be able to assert that power effectively? Maybe he'll make mistakes. He has to be very careful if he's not If he's too weak, he'll get overwhelmed. If he's get strong, if he's too strong, he's going to lose control. So it is a problem. So as far as what it means for Pluto for Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, let's just give you an idea of what Ebertin says, for example. Reinhold Ebertin in the combination of stellar influences. So if you look at what he says, Mars-Pluto is, according to Ebertin, is the principle of superhuman power, in parentheses, force, brutality. And so Neptune this is what Ebertin says about Neptune on the Mars-Pluto midpoint: irreconcilableness or implacability, cunning and deceitfulness, the tendency to cause harm to others secretly and unobtrusively. A disaster or catastrophe caused by water, well, that makes sense. So the way Milei uses his power is going to be quite important, and I think he is going to be under continued pressure. And while we're on the subject of Javier Milei, it's probably a good idea to just look at his solar return. So here is Javier Milei's solar return for this year. Well, actually, that's for the year coming up. That's a kind of a note for the future. So that solar return, if he's still president in October, you can see that that is a very major solar return. He's got a Mars-Pluto conjunction in his chart, and in his solar return we get the Mars-Pluto signature, Mars-Pluto opposition, Sun square Mars square Pluto. If I had to make a forecast about that solar return, I would have said that if he's still president, we're going to see him being quite draconian. I think he's not going to be able to rule Argentina as a democratic president. I think that might be something going on with Milei. I'll be talking about Milei's chart in greater detail in another video, but I think there's certainly stuff going on in Argentina. Now, I do want to talk about someone I have talked about before on the subject of despots, and that is Emmanuel Macron. A reminder that Macron has a Sun Mercury conjunction at 29 Sagittarius, and it's actually opposition Jupiter. Jupiter. They call Macron Jupiter, don't they? And so what will happen here is that this week, Neptune is now on his Sun Mercury midpoint. So here is a man who's finding it very difficult to make coherent decisions. I think he is. I think to an extent Macron is losing it. And I think that whereas Mercury and Venus and the Sun move into Cancer, they will be triggering. They'll be triggering the Neptune aspects to his Sun and to his Sun and Mercury. So I think that perhaps over the week we'll be look at what Macron is doing. He just may not be able to help himself. A lot of scope here for him making mistakes. And look at this Jupiter. I think this Jupiter is in Cancer, well placed in Cancer. In some ways, it's in its exaltation. It is retrograde, but it is opposition Sun Mercury. So Jupiter opposition Sun and Mercury. That is the tendency, perhaps, for excessive behaviour. So perhaps as the Sun and perhaps as Venus and Mercury move into Cancer, as they hit the Sun Jupiter and Mercury Jupiter midpoints, watch what Macron is doing. I think that he's always doing something, so that's not really a very difficult prediction to make, and he is quite unstable, increasingly unstable. I think that instability is probably connected with Neptune. And there are other things going on. I've looked at his Vedic chart recently, and it hasn't been good since February. So I think we can expect Macron to make further dramatic announcements, and I think he's particularly upset about Ukraine, but and that's probably linked with the fact that France is losing control in Africa. And anyway, he has a powerful ego, and I think that we do need to watch Macron. Someone who has not been in the news very recently has been Ghislaine Maxwell. So I'm slightly concerned about Ghislaine Maxwell. I think she's where is she in a prison? Is it in Florida? She's been in prison with no immediate hope of release, and there's her Mars at 0 degrees 39 Capricorn on the 8th house. It's a rather difficult Mars. I think that can be quite a self-destructive Mars, and I mean, I know that Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So in the right situation, that is a good Mars. And I suppose you could say that Mars in the 8th house in Capricorn has a certain amount of resilience. But Neptune is getting quite close to the square of her Mars. Okay, it won't be exact until next year, but with Sun, Venus, and Mercury going into Cancer, they're going to be opposition her Mars across her 2nd, 8th axis. So I would have said this is a time perhaps where Ghislaine Maxwell has to be careful. It's all about money and survival. So I don't know whether we'll probably won't hear any news from Ghislaine Maxwell once she's she's in a federal prison, and so you're shut away from the world. But I suppose we should pay some attention to her. Then Kemi Badenoch. So Kemi Badenoch, she was in the news about a week or two ago. Remember, Kemi Badenoch is one of the front runners to take over from Sunak as leader of the Conservative Party, and I talked about her chart a week or two ago. And I don't have a time of birth for her, but just to point out that Kemi Badenoch has her Mercury at 0 degrees Capricorn. So she's got Neptune pretty close to the square of her Mercury, and she has also the Mercury and Venus, as they move into Cancer, will make an opposition to Mercury. I don't know what Kemi Badenoch will be doing this week. It may be, this is a critical time in the campaign. I mean, I suppose the Tories are in trouble. Well, particularly now we hear there's one poll that the Reform UK, in terms of the popular vote, has pulled ahead by 1 point of the Conservatives. So maybe she'll feel that she has to do something or say something, and take a more active role. It's not going to be easy, though, because this is Mercury and Venus, and eventually the Sun on Thursday with the solstice making an opposition to her Mercury. So if she does say anything, if she does try to intervene more actively in the campaign, she must make sure that she gets it right. It's a kind of time where the wrong word could scupper her leadership campaign, which I assume will be happening once Sunak resigns after he loses the election. But she needs to be careful what she says, but I think she's going to feel that she has to say something. Then we've got our favourite Canadian Prime Minister, who is Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau has his Mars at 2935 Pisces, so Neptune is opposition Neptune is actually conjunct his Mars, and he has a Mars-Pluto opposition in his chart. So here is someone who has a great desire for power. I mean, if you're a politician, you do have a great desire for power. You must have, that's the nature of being a politician. So that isn't surprising. One shouldn't perhaps hold that against him. But so what's happening is that Neptune is not just is conjunct his Mars. So the way he asserts his power may be problematic, and he's also got Mars conjunct Skeet. I mean, he just has that in his chart. I mean, here is someone who can assert power in the wrong way. So what's going to happen now is we're going to have, as it's happening right now, as Sun and Venus as Venus and Mercury move into Capricorn, they make the square to his Mars. As the Sun moves into Cancer, it makes, again, square to his Mars. And so that's like triggering Neptune's energy. So it's a time where perhaps Macron is asserting his power in the wrong way. Certainly something bothering him, and the decisions he makes may not be entirely fortunate. So one should be watching Justin Trudeau. Finally, I suppose I need to say something about Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. We've got a peace conference, haven't we, where Russia isn't turning up, which is a bit ridiculous. I mean, how can you have a peace conference when one of the warring parties is not invited or isn't turning up? So anyway, here is Zelensky's chart, and I just wanted to focus on one thing. I wanted to focus on his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Zelensky's Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 1432 Leo. So there's his Mars. He's got Mars and Saturn in Leo. He's got the Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 1432 Leo. So remember, that is going to be 135 degrees from the Aries point. So it's sesquiquadrate the Aries point. Or you could say, well, semi-square the solstice point at 0 Cancer. And with Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it is, you're dealing with someone who is capable of bringing a lot of death and destruction to the world around them. And now, for most people, we don't have that opportunity. But if you're president of Ukraine, you certainly have that opportunity. And so, through his actions or lack of actions and persisting with this war, Russia gave him a pretty good. He got a pretty good deal in 2022 in Istanbul. If he hadn't been pushed by the West into rejecting Russia's overture at Istanbul. He was offered a huge amount. I mean, in terms of what we've got now, in fact, you could, from a Russian nationalist perspective, Russia was probably giving away too much in the spring of 2022, at least from a perspective of people who are more nationalist, perhaps more belligerent than Putin, and there are quite a lot of them around in Russia. But anyway, the war continued, and so he does have Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Just a reminder about what that means. I'm going to look at Alfred Witter's Rules of Planetary Pictures. He says Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. They write Aries on the Mars, general periodic working, general interruption of work, sickness, separation, death. I mean, that is a bit of a euphemism in some ways, because Aries is the world at large. And so world at large, at Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it is about someone who can cause a lot of damage. Victoria Nuland, who used to work for the State Department, who very much was arguably was one of the architects of America's effective takeover of Ukraine and who basically pushed Ukraine into a situation where this war became inevitable, Victoria Nuland had Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So why am I talking about it now? Because Neptune is on the Aries point. Neptune is very close to therefore Neptune is very close to Zelensky's Mars-Saturn midpoint. Mercury and Venus, as they move towards 0 degrees Cancer, are triggering the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Sun, as it moves towards the solstice, is triggering a Mars-Saturn midpoint. So this thing in his chart, in Zelensky's chart, Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, is being hit by Neptune in general, and the triggers are Sun, Mercury, Venus. So I think he is under a lot of pressure, and as president of Ukraine, I suppose this is what's happening in what's going on. And some of it, by the way, as Neptune has been hitting his Mars-Saturn midpoint, if you look at some of the Ukrainian casualty figures over the last week, they've been incredibly high. Much higher, as high as they've ever been. With apparently, people talking about. There have been 2 days when I think the Ukrainians lost over 2,000 killed and wounded in one day, in 2 consecutive days. So that's perhaps Neptune on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, really stoking things up, with the Sun, Mercury, and Venus now about to trigger all of that. So those are a few charts. Before I do the I Ching, I just wanted to go back to Donald Trump's solar return, because I've been thinking about Donald Trump's solar return a lot. Here's Donald Trump's natal chart, which I've been looking at, and here is his solar return for 2024. And I want to look at one particular thing in this solar return, and this is Moon opposition Saturn. And do we look at it from a rational perspective or an empirical perspective? I'm using those two terms, rational and empirical. I'm using those two terms in the way, I think it was, what's his name? Is it William James? He was a 19th century American psychologist who wrote about the difference between a rational and an empirical view. So a rational view is when you try to understand something sort of logically and intellectually without reference to the world out there and data. Whereas if you're empirical, you try to look at data points and you try to some extent use the scientific method. Of course, you can't really use the scientific method with astrology, but you can look at other charts. So from a rational perspective, that Moon opposition Saturn in Donald Trump's solar return is not good, particularly if we actually count it. So Moon opposition Saturn, it is going to be exact in 4.5 degrees. Can you see? 4.5 degrees. They're 4.5 degrees separation. So you count 4.5 degrees from Trump's birthday, June the 13th. So that's July, August, September, October. That's the end of October, which is pretty much the election. So we have wonderful symbolism there of Trump losing the election with that Moon opposition Saturn. Again, I'm using rational perspective. What would we expect Moon opposition Saturn to be like? But from an empirical perspective, it is a bit different. I looked at Hitler's chart recently. That was one chart I looked at, and I looked at Hitler's solar return for 1932, the solar return just before he became Chancellor of Germany, and then from then he quickly became dictator. So looking at Hitler's 1932 solar return, we had an exact Moon-Saturn square. Now, you would have thought exact Moon-Saturn square, from a rational perspective, would say it's going to be a bad year. but this was the year he came to power. Now, you could say, bad for whom? Maybe it was certainly bad year for Germany, but wasn't so bad for Hitler in the sense of his own ambitions. And so you could say that you have to look at the solar return in two ways. Now, another example of someone who had a lot of power is Margaret Thatcher. So this is Margaret Thatcher's horoscope. So remember, Margaret Thatcher, British politician. She was elected. She was elected Prime Minister in May 1979, and she was a powerful figure. Not a dictator, but she won 3 elections, and for nearly 12 years she controlled Britain. In the end, she lost the plot, but she had a good run. Now, here is her solar return for the 1978, the year. Well, this is her birthday preceding her winning the election, and in her solar return, you can see that the moon was at 9 degrees 50 Pisces, and Saturn was at 9 degrees 35 Virgo. So you could say she's got Moon-Saturn opposition. That's really bad. She's not going to win. She's not going to win the election. Of course, she won the election handsomely. So in Thatcher's chart, Moon-Saturn opposition didn't stop her winning. We're talking about a tough leader who had a big influence on her country. Many would say a negative influence on her country. It kind of depends on your politics. I'm not, I don't think from as far as I'm concerned, Margaret Thatcher wasn't as great as some people make it out to be, and I think that in many ways she destroyed Britain. That's my view. Maybe I'm looking at it from a perspective of me as a teenager. Or early 20s, in my early 20s when I was in there, we couldn't stand her. My father couldn't stand her either. He always used to vote Conservative, but he couldn't stand her. So Moon opposition Saturn. So what does that mean for Trump? It means that we should not see that Moon opposition Saturn in Trump's chart and automatically think that Moon-Saturn opposition means he's going to lose in November. And yes, it fits very nicely, 4.5 degrees, applying, got 4.5 degrees to go before the opposition. That might be perfect, Moon opposition Saturn. That's when he loses in November. But maybe that opposition between Moon and Saturn is about him winning in November. Now, I'm still not prepared to commit myself, but it's just very interesting the way Trump's solar return has that Moon opposition Saturn. Okay, that's enough astrology, and what I'm going to do now is look at the I Ching. So just a reminder, if you don't want your I Ching done for this week, you don't have to have it done. You can stop watching the video now. This only applies to people who want their I Ching read, and because I asked the question in terms of people watching the segment, doesn't apply if you don't watch the segment. And just also a reminder that the way I do the I Ching is I have 4 broad sections. I have a general section, then money, then career and business, and then relationships. Okay, so I asked this question. What is the week starting on Monday, June the 17th, going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 13, which is fellowship with men. And in general, it is a week where we have to interact with other people. There are people to deal with. We can form alliances, perhaps, and whatever we're trying to do this week, we always have to consider the social dimension. Are people helpful? Are they unhelpful? Are they getting in our way? It's difficult in general to be alone. And we have here two moving lines. The third line moves and the fifth line moves. So in the I Ching, when the third line from the bottom moves, that tends to be unfortunate, the third line from the bottom. And in this case, I think it is. It is about mistrust. So in the first instance, as we try to engage with other people, maybe with the world at large. So if we're not engaging with other people, but if we're just engaging with, with organizations, with having to deal with our community and whatever, there's just a general sense of mistrust. People are capable of anything. No one really knows what the other person is going to do, and things cannot be taken at face value. And it's kind of not surprising, is it? When we've got Mercury square Neptune, we've got Venus square Neptune, Sun square Neptune. No one really knows what other people are going to do. And I think that is going to be a problem. Then the fifth line moves. Fifth line is a line that is very much connected with relationships. And I know this is a general part, but it is about other people, and it's about who our friends are and who our friends are not. And it's talking about a situation where there has been some kind of separation. We're trying to engage with other people, but other people just aren't there. There may be people we've known in the past who we wanted to get on with, and we just have not been able to get on with them. But finally, there's a realization that we know who our friends are. And so trust can be rediscovered. So if you start the week with an attitude of mistrust, it may not continue forever. And by the end of the week, there may be more togetherness. And this hexagram 13, it does move. It moves to hexagram 21, which is biting through. And biting through is really about a situation where we are dealing with something difficult. We're dealing with difficult people, I think, but we shouldn't take things at face value. And biting through is a hexagram that the I Ching, when the I Ching describes it, it's often connected with punishment. Punishment as in rehabilitation, and seeing the good in people, and perhaps by pressurizing people, putting pressure, pressurizing them so that they change, and by making the effort, perhaps one has to be critical, perhaps one has to do things that people don't want us to do, but by putting pressure on people, we can bite through to the good in them. And that's not just about people. Maybe it's about certain situations, things going on that seem bad, but we have to make the best of it. Not just make the best of it, but see the gold in every situation. And I think that's actually how it's going to work out. We can see that things aren't quite as bad as they seem, and indeed, when we get through to the gold, then things should really transform. So, overall, it seems to be a week that starts off being quite difficult with a lot of mistrust, but it gradually improves. And by the end of the week, we can really start to turn things around. Now, as far as money is concerned, when it comes to money, with fellowship with men, it just may feel that our finances are very much tied up with other people. What other people do is going to have an impact on our finances. And who are we trusting? We may be trusting certain people to help us financially, or maybe it may be that someone owes us money, or we are considering lending someone money, and we're trying to have some kind of agreement about money. But whatever it is, there is actually a huge amount of mistrust going on. And it may be a case that we really can't trust people. We'd like to trust people with our money. We'd like to assume that people will do the right thing. But I'm not convinced that is an assumption we can make, especially at the beginning of a week when, as I've said, we've got Mercury and Venus square Neptune. Neptune is strongly placed. Neptune may not be strong, but it's in a position to cause a lot of damage. People can say one thing and do something completely different, and it can be a big problem. So at first, it really is not a time to trust people, and with money, because I think things can go wrong. Now, if we do have to engage financially with other people, we need to make the right choices. And it's not just the third line that moves, it's the fifth line that moves as well. And the fifth line indicates that we're trying to find the right connections in order to sort out our finances, and not just sort out our finances, but perhaps to help us grow financially, or to get round a financial problem, or we need financial advice. And there is someone out there, it seems, or maybe it's just an organization, and we're looking for the right organization, the right person, and it's in the first instance, it's difficult, but the right person is certainly there, or the right organization. I don't know, it might be the right bank, the right financial institution. Remember, this video is for entertainment purposes only. I am not giving financial advice, but it's just a bit of fun. if you're crazy enough to believe in what I'm rambling about with the I Ching. So the right person, the right organization, the right financial institution seems to be there. It seems to be available, and at a certain point in the week, you should be able to get in touch with it, and then that leads to the fifth line. And that leads to the second hexagram, which is hexagram 21, which is biting through. So we're biting through. Once we've started to get things sorted out financially, we still realize that something is wrong, or that someone is not behaving well financially. Now, it could be us. It could be us overspending or overcommitting. It could be someone else overspending, overcommitting. But with biting through, we address the problem, and it's about administering punishments. Not literally, but just telling someone, or perhaps telling ourselves, but we've got to get ourselves together. And if we can do that, again, we can find the gold, because the idea is you bite through hard leather until you find the gold in the middle, and you find it. Or it can be, I think, finding some piece of gold in some pheasant you're eating, or some game. I'm a vegetarian, I don't eat animals, but maybe some gold arrowhead. But you find what you're looking for through all your efforts. And so, from a financial point of view, if you're tough and you find the right allies or the right organization to help you out, then I think that it can actually be a week of improvement. Turning to career and business, if that is appropriate to you, may not be appropriate. We do get fellowship with men. You may find at work that there just are a lot of people to deal with. It just can't be helped. And you have to interact. I suppose you have to share. And if you want to get anything done, then you're going to need support. If you are looking for a job, then again, it's not just about you sending off a resume or a CV. It's about you having to engage. Maybe there are people that you think can help you get a job, maybe. And of course, if you're running a business, you rely on the social dimension, even if it's maybe clients, maybe people working for you, maybe working with you. But the problem is that the third line from the bottom is moving, and so I think at work there is going to be a huge amount of mistrust. People are not going to trust each other. It will just feel that everyone has got their own agenda. Everyone's looking after themselves, and this is a situation that just persists, and you can't just assume that everyone is going to work for the common good, because they're just going to think they're going to just put their own priorities first. I mean, to an extent, that may not be entirely true, because just because you mistrust someone doesn't mean they are actually untrustworthy. But there is an atmosphere of mistrust, and for example, if you're self-employed and you want to do some work for someone, will they pay you? That might be a question. If you are applying for a job, can you trust your employer? Can your employer trust? Can an employer trust you? So if you're hiring someone to do something, there's just no trust here, and I think that that's just something that needs to be accepted, because it just is difficult to know who to trust. And remember, Neptune is on the Aries point, Venus, Mercury is square Neptune, Sun is square Neptune. Things aren't clear. People are not making themselves clear, and I think it's very easy not to trust people. But the fifth line moves, and so what the fifth line is moving is you actually find the people you need to get in touch with. So at work, you don't have to communicate with everyone. You don't have to cooperate with everyone. You only have to cooperate with the people who matter. And there are people who you can 100% trust. And as the week progresses, it will become clear who those people are. Or if you're applying for a job, who do you apply to? Who can you trust? As the week progresses, it will become clearer who you should be applying to. Or if you're an employer hiring people, don't hire people or don't contract things out, or sign contracts with people at the beginning of a week, perhaps, because it's not going to be clear who you're going to trust. It's only going to be later in the week that you'll know who to trust and who not to trust, and then it will become clear. And if you're in any sort of business partnership with someone, or you're contemplating a business partnership, then to begin with mistrust, but then it becomes actually absolutely clear who you can trust. And this moves through to the hexagram biting through. So by the end of a week, there's a lot more clarity. And also there's this sextile aspect between Mercury and Mars, which is a very dynamic. It's quite an aggressive aspect, but it's aggressive in quite a constructive way, biting through, telling people what's on your mind, or giving people a piece of your mind. And with biting through, if you're dealing with people, you might trust them, but you still know that they're not getting it right. And so you can tell people what they're doing wrong. And if you're managing people, it's a time for managing people so that you can make the most of them. You know, you've got to get through the hard lever, the intransigence, and get through to the gold which is within people. And so, you know, you can't take things at face value, if things aren't going entirely right. But it's not really about mistrust. It's about perhaps knowing that some people, some situations can let you down, but then doing something to change it. So if you find, from a business career perspective, by the end of a week things aren't entirely going the way you'd like them to go, don't just give up. Just accept the possibility that change can be, that there can be changes, that people can actually reform, because you know, people who seem fairly incompetent and useless can actually turn over a new leaf if they are managed in the right way. And of course that might apply to you. So if you feel from a work perspective that you're not getting things done, that things aren't working out, you can look at the mirror and look at your own intransigence, look at what you yourself are doing wrong, and then you can get through to the gold within you. And finally, I want to turn to relationships. And in a way, this hexagram, fellowship with men, arguably does apply most to relationships. You know, when I talk about relationships, you know, I'm talking about all kinds of relationships, whatever their nature. And with fellowship with men, clearly relationships are important. When I say fellowship with men, I mean, you know, fellowship with people. I mean, maybe it's relevant. Fellowship with men, I suppose you sometimes have to take the I Ching literally, but it's all about how you relate to people. And I think that if you're in any relationship at the beginning of a week, again, whatever its nature, it's going to take up a lot of your time, at least your attention, but there's still going to be a lack of trust. There are just people out there you don't trust. Maybe you feel they're flaky, they can't be relied on, and if you're involved in a new relationship at the beginning of a week, it's not going to work, I don't think, because, again, fundamental lack of trust, and lack of trust works both ways. It's not just you not trusting the other person, it's the other person not trusting you. So that really doesn't help. And so I don't think in any relationship there's going to be much progress at the beginning of a week, because you're just you're not prepared to make yourself vulnerable, because why would you want to make yourself vulnerable? Venus is square Neptune. I mean, that's bad. There's just a lot of confusion. Who can you trust? Who can't you trust? And I do think that third line moving from the bottom really does reflect the fact that Venus is square Neptune. But the fifth line also moves. And the fifth line is the perfect relationship line. It's basically saying, the I Ching is saying, you and someone else who have been estranged, who weren't in contact with each other, finally you get together. So if there's someone who you've been trying to get together with, again, it's not necessarily anything romantic. It depends on the situation. It depends on the kind of questions that you are asking. But if there's someone you've been trying to get together with and it's been really hard work, there's I won't say the promise, but the possibility with the I Ching that you and this other person can find common ground, and you can really come together, get in contact with each other, and perhaps it's about a relationship being restored. Perhaps you and someone else have drifted apart, and there has been mistrust, but maybe you find a new way of relating, or it could be someone you've been trying to involve yourself with, but it just hasn't worked, and one thing and another has happened, but suddenly there is an opportunity to come back together with this person, or find the links that you've been looking for, which perhaps haven't been there in the past. And then we move to a new hexagram, which is biting through. And so with biting through, I think that this particularly applies to existing relationships which have not been working well, biting through. Someone has not been behaving correctly. You've been tempted to give up on them. And maybe this going back to the previous hexagram. Yes, you can get back together with someone. But now, having got back together with them, you still realize that nothing is perfect, that they still have personality flaws, or maybe it's you have personality, not personality flaws, that's too strong, but you and the other person, or maybe you, maybe them, maybe both of you, there are things that you haven't been behaving correctly, you haven't been treating each other properly, correctly, but you need to work on it. And biting through, getting through the intransigence and the selfishness and the self-obsession, and getting through to the gold. That's what it's all about. And so in this sense, in many cases, relationships, it's worth struggling with, because you can actually find the gold which unites you and someone else. So in the end, I think in terms of relationships, the week can have a positive conclusion. So that's it for this week. I hope you found this video of some use or some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you are not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I would of course be really, really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.